I found out about the special assessment the same way everyone in Riverside Grove did. A cream-colored envelope in my mailbox on a Tuesday morning in March, official letterhead from the HOA board demanding $15,000 within 90 days. My coffee went cold in my hand as I stood in my driveway, reading the single-page notice over and over, trying to make sense of how our community had gone from financially stable to bankrupt in less than 2 years. My name is William Easton, and I had lived in Riverside Grove, a planned community just outside Sacramento, California, for 8 years. The neighborhood was beautiful, with mature oak trees lining the streets, a community pool, tennis courts, and well-maintained common areas. My wife died 3 years ago, and I had stayed in our home because it felt like the last place I could still feel connected to her. The neighborhood had always been peaceful, boring even, which was exactly what I needed. Until the current board took over. I walked back inside, dropping the notice on my kitchen counter. My phone was already ringing. It was my neighbor, Greg Thompson, who lived 3 houses down. "Did you get the letter?" he asked without preamble. His voice was tight with anger. "Just opened it. $15,000? Greg, what the hell happened to our reserve fund?" "That is exactly what I want to know. I am calling an emergency meeting. Can you come over tonight? I have been collecting information, and you are not going to believe what I found." That evening, I walked down to Greg's house where about 20 homeowners had gathered in his living room. The energy was tense, people speaking in low, angry voices. Greg stood at the front of the room holding a stack of papers. "Thank you all for coming," he said, waiting for everyone to quiet down. "I know we are all shocked by this special assessment, so I did some digging. As you know, every HOA is required to maintain financial records that homeowners can access. I requested our records for the past 2 years. He held up the stack of papers. "What I found is disturbing. 2 years ago, when Deborah Winston and her board were elected, our reserve fund had $412,000. That money was set aside for major repairs, roof replacements, repaving roads, that sort of thing. As of last month, that fund has exactly $1,800 left in it." The room erupted. People were shouting questions, and Greg had to raise his hands to quiet everyone down. "Where did the money go?" someone yelled. "That is what gets interesting," Greg said. "According to these records, the board has been hosting what they call monthly appreciation events. But when you look at the expenses, we are talking about events that cost anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000 each. Catered dinners at expensive restaurants, weekend trips to wine country, a 4-day retreat in Lake Tahoe at a luxury resort." "Who attended these events?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Just the board members and their families," Greg replied. 5 board members, their spouses, and in some cases, their adult children. Meanwhile, the actual maintenance of our community has been neglected. The pool pump has been broken for 6 months. The landscaping looks terrible because they switched to the cheapest company they could find. And now, they want each of us to pay $15,000 to replenish the fund they emptied throwing parties for themselves." An older woman named Margaret stood up, her face red. "This cannot be legal. They cannot just spend our money like that." "That is exactly right," Greg said. "I contacted a lawyer who specializes in HOA disputes. He said this is not just mismanagement, it is potential embezzlement and breach of fiduciary duty. The board members have a legal obligation to act in the best interest of the community, not themselves." "So what do we do?" I asked. "First, we refuse to pay the special assessment," Greg said. "Second, we demand a recall election to remove the current board. And third, we file a lawsuit to recover the funds and hold them accountable." The next morning, I decided to confront Deborah Winston directly. She lived in one of the larger homes in the community, a sprawling 2-story with a perfectly manicured lawn. I rang her doorbell at 9 in the morning, and she answered wearing a silk robe and holding a small dog that would not stop yapping. "William," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "what brings you by so early?" "You know exactly why I am here, Deborah. The special assessment." "Oh, that." She waved her hand dismissively. "It is unfortunate, but necessary. The reserve fund was depleted due to unforeseen circumstances." "Unforeseen circumstances?" I could not keep the anger out of my voice. "Greg Thompson got the financial records. We know about the parties, the trips, the dinners. You spent over $400,000 of community money on entertaining yourself and the other board members. Her expression hardened. Those were legitimate board expenses. Building community, fostering relationships among leadership, all perfectly legal. Legal? You took money that was supposed to be used for community maintenance and spent it on luxury vacations. How is that legal? I suggest you read the CC and RS more carefully, William. The board has discretionary authority over how funds are allocated. If you have a problem with it, you can bring it up at the next board meeting. But the special assessment stands. You have 90 days to pay, or we will place a lien on your property. She shut the door in my face, and I stood there on her porch, shaking with rage. Over the next week, the neighborhood was in chaos. People were forming groups, sharing information, and getting angrier by the day. Greg hired an attorney named Michael Bradford, who specialized in HOA law. Bradford reviewed our community's governing documents and financial records and confirmed what we suspected. The board had violated multiple laws in their fiduciary duties. This is one of the more egregious cases I have seen, Bradford told us during a meeting at Greg's house. The board members used community funds for personal benefit, which is a clear breach of their duty. We have grounds for a lawsuit to recover the funds and possibly criminal charges depending on how the district attorney's office views the evidence. Criminal charges? Margaret asked, her eyes widening. Potentially. This could be prosecuted as embezzlement or fraud. But first, let us focus on the civil side. I am going to file a lawsuit against all 5 board members personally, seeking to recover the funds plus damages. I am also going to petition the court for an injunction to stop the special assessment from going forward. How long will this take? I asked. Months, possibly longer. HOA litigation is notoriously slow, but the good news is that the evidence is very clear. They documented everything themselves in the financial records. They were not even trying to hide it. The next board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday, and every single homeowner showed up. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, and people were standing in the back because all the chairs were filled. Deborah sat at the head table with the other 4 board members, Patricia Chambers, Linda Morrison, Susan Hartley, and Karen Vaughn. All 5 of them were middle-aged women who had been friends for years before joining the board together. Karen Vaughn was particularly insufferable. She was the secretary, a woman with bleached blonde hair and an attitude that made you want to throw something. She constantly complained about everything, from how people parked their cars to what color someone painted their mailbox. She had filed more violations against homeowners than the previous 3 boards combined. Deborah called the meeting to order, and immediately people started shouting questions. She banged her gavel, trying to restore order. "If everyone could please calm down," she said in that condescending tone she always used. "We will address your concerns in an orderly fashion." "Where did our reserve fund go?" someone yelled. "Yeah, explain the $400,000 you spent on parties," another voice called out. Karen leaned into her microphone. "I do not appreciate the hostile tone. We are volunteers, giving our time to serve this community. If you cannot be respectful, we will adjourn this meeting." That just made people angrier. Greg stood up, holding the financial records. These documents show that over the past 2 years, the board spent $410,000 on what you call appreciation events. Dinners at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, weekends at luxury resorts, wine tasting tours, all attended only by board members and their families. Meanwhile, our pool has been broken for 6 months. The roads are full of potholes and the landscaping looks terrible. How do you justify that? Deborah glared at him. Those events were necessary for board cohesion and planning. We needed to meet in relaxed environments to discuss complex community issues. You needed to spend $30,000 at a Lake Tahoe resort to discuss community issues? I called out. You could not do that at the clubhouse like every other board before you? Our methods are our own business, Patricia said. We were elected by the community to make decisions, and that is what we did. Well, we are electing you, Greg said. I am initiating a recall petition. If we get signatures from 20% of homeowners, we can force a recall election. I am betting we can get a lot more than 20%. You do that, Karen said, her voice dripping with venom. But the special assessment is still due in 83 days. If you do not pay, we will foreclose on your homes. The meeting descended into chaos after that, with people screaming and the board walking out. As we filed out of the clubhouse, I could see the battle lines being drawn. This was going to get ugly. Greg's recall petition gathered signatures fast. Within 2 weeks, he had over 70% of homeowners signed on, far more than the 20% required. The board was forced to schedule a recall election for June, 3 months away. But they did not go quietly. Karen Vaughn started sending violation notices to anyone who had signed the petition. Suddenly, people were getting fined for having their trash cans visible from the street, for having the wrong shade of paint on their trim, for parking their cars in their own driveways for more than 48 hours. It was petty and vindictive, but it was also legal under our community rules. I got my first violation notice in April. According to Karen, my lawn was half an inch too long in one section. The fine was $250. I called her immediately. Karen, this is ridiculous. My lawn is perfectly maintained. According to HOA guidelines, grass cannot exceed 3 inches in height. I measured your front lawn yesterday, and the southeast corner was 3.5 inches. You measured my grass with a ruler? It is my job as secretary to ensure compliance with community standards. You have 10 days to pay the fine, or it will double. I am not paying this. Then we will place a lien on your property. Have a nice day, William. She hung up, and I resisted the urge to throw my phone across the room. Michael Bradford, our attorney, filed the lawsuit in May. The complaint was 40 pages long, detailing every expenditure the board had made, every party, every trip, every expensive dinner. It named all 5 board members as defendants and sought to recover the full $410,000, plus attorney fees and punitive damages. The local news picked up the story. A reporter from the Sacramento Bee came out to interview homeowners, and the article that ran the following week was devastating for the board. The headline read, Riverside Grove HOA board accused of spending entire reserve fund on luxury parties. The article included photos from the board's social media accounts showing them drinking wine at expensive resorts and eating at high-end restaurants. Deborah had posted a picture from their Lake Tahoe trip with the caption, Board Retreat, working hard for our amazing community. The comment section exploded with outrage from people across the state. The publicity put pressure on the Sacramento District Attorney's Office to investigate. In late May, a detective named Rodriguez came to interview several homeowners, including me. I have reviewed the financial records your attorney provided, Detective Rodriguez said when we met at a coffee shop in town. On the surface, this looks like misappropriation of funds. The question is whether it rises to the level of criminal embezzlement. They spent over $400,000 of our money on personal entertainment, I said. How is that not embezzlement? The complication is that they technically had authority to spend HOA funds. The question is whether a jury would believe they genuinely thought these expenses were legitimate board activities or whether they knew they were using community money for personal benefit. They knew, I said firmly. You do not spend $30,000 on a weekend trip and think that is a legitimate community expense. I agree with you, but proving criminal intent can be tricky. Let me finish my investigation, and then I will make a recommendation to the DA. The recall election was held on a Saturday in early June. The turnout was nearly 100%, something unheard of in HOA elections. By the end of the day, all 5 board members were removed from their positions, with over 90% of homeowners voting in favor of the recall. We immediately held an election for a new board. Greg was elected president, I was voted in as treasurer, and 3 other longtime residents filled the remaining positions. Our first action was to rescind the special assessment and freeze all non-essential spending until we could fully assess the financial situation. Our second action was to fully cooperate with law enforcement and provide them with everything they needed for their investigation. In July, Detective Rodriguez completed his investigation and submitted his findings to the district attorney. 2 weeks later, all 5 former board members were charged with felony embezzlement. The DA held a press conference announcing the charges, stating that the evidence clearly showed the defendants had used community funds for personal benefit, knowing they were violating their fiduciary duties. These individuals were entrusted with managing funds on behalf of hundreds of families, the DA said. Instead, They treated the HOA treasury as their personal piggy bank, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on luxury vacations and expensive dinners while the community they were supposed to serve fell into disrepair. This kind of betrayal of trust will not be tolerated. Deborah, Patricia, Linda, Susan, and Karen were all arrested and released on bond. Their trial was scheduled for the following spring. Meanwhile, our new board was working to repair the damage. We hired a forensic accountant to trace every dollar the previous board had spent. The results were even worse than we thought. In addition to the documented parties and trips, there were cash withdrawals totaling over $50,000 with no receipts or explanations. The accountant suspected the money had been pocketed directly. We also discovered that the previous board had been accepting kickbacks from vendors. The landscaping company they hired, which did terrible work, had been paying Patricia $500 a month under the table. The pool maintenance company that never actually fixed anything had a similar arrangement with Linda. Our lawyer amended the civil lawsuit to include these additional allegations, increasing the amount we were seeking to recover. The community itself was starting to heal, but slowly. We held town halls every month to keep everyone informed about the legal proceedings and the financial recovery efforts. The special assessment was gone, but we needed to rebuild the reserve fund somehow. We implemented a modest increase in monthly HOA dues, about $40 per month, which was far more manageable than the $15,000 lump sum the previous board had demanded. We also went after the board members' personal assets. Our lawyer filed liens against their homes and froze their bank accounts. Deborah tried to sell her house and move out of state, but the lien prevented the sale from going through. She was trapped, and she was furious about it. In September, Karen Vaughn showed up at my house. I opened the door to find her standing on my porch, and she looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed, she had bags under her eyes, and she seemed to have aged 10 years and 4 months. "What do you want, Karen?" "I need to talk to you," she said. Her voice was small, nothing like the aggressive tone I was used to. "Can I come in?" Against my better judgment, I let her inside. We sat in my living room, and she started crying. "I am sorry," she said. "I am so sorry for everything. The violations, the special assessment, all of it. I know you do not believe me, but I did not realize how bad it was. Deborah told us the expenses were normal, that other HOAs did the same thing. I was stupid to believe her." "You were the one sending out violation notices to people who signed the recall petition," I said, unmoved by her tears. "You were the one threatening to foreclose on people's homes." "I know. I was angry and scared. I thought if we just pushed hard enough, everyone would back down and we could make this go away. But it has destroyed my life. My husband left me. My kids will not talk to me. I'm going to lose my house and probably go to prison. And for what? Some dinners and trips that I did not even enjoy that much? Then why did you do it?" "Because Deborah made it seem normal. She said we deserved it, that we were working hard for the community, and this was our compensation. It started small, just a nice dinner here and there. But then it escalated, and by the time I realized what was happening, I was in too deep. I was afraid that if I spoke up, I would get blamed for everything." "So you are a victim now?" I could not keep the sarcasm out of my voice. "No, I am not a victim. I made my choices, and I'm going to pay for them. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I know it does not change anything, but I needed to say it." She left after that, and I sat in my living room feeling a mix of anger and something that might have been pity. Karen was right that it did not change anything, but I could see how someone could get caught up in it, how the line between reasonable and excessive could blur when you were surrounded by people telling you everything was fine. But that did not excuse what they did. They had stolen from hundreds of families, including elderly people on fixed incomes and young couples just starting out. The consequences they were facing were entirely their own fault. The criminal trial began in March of the following year. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. They had financial records, emails, text messages, and social media posts all proving that the board members knew exactly what they were doing. One particularly damaging email chain showed Deborah telling the others, "Let's enjoy it while we can. By the time anyone figures out what's happening, we'll have had a great 2 years." The defense tried to argue that the expenses were legitimate board activities, but the jury was not buying it. How could a $30,000 weekend at a luxury resort with no other homeowners present be a legitimate community expense? How could a $15,000 dinner at a Michelin star restaurant in San Francisco serve any purpose other than personal enjoyment? The trial lasted 3 weeks. All 5 defendants were found guilty on multiple counts of embezzlement and fraud. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 2 months later. In the meantime, our civil lawsuit was moving forward. The judge had ruled in our favor on most of the key issues, finding that the board members had clearly breached their fiduciary duties. The only question left was how much they would have to pay. In May, the judge ordered the 5 defendants to pay back the full $410,000 they had spent, plus an additional $200,000 in punitive damages and attorney fees. The total judgment was over $600,000. But getting the money was going to be difficult. None of the board members were wealthy. They had nice homes, but most of them had mortgages. Their combined assets were probably worth around $2 million, but after selling their homes and liquidating everything, we would be lucky to recover half of what they owed us. Still, it was something. The liens on their properties meant they could not sell or refinance without paying us first, so at least we had leverage. The criminal sentencing came in late May. The judge was not lenient. Deborah, as the ringleader, received 4 years in state prison. Patricia and Linda each got 3 years. Susan and Karen received 2 years, with the judge noting that they appeared to have been followers rather than leaders, though that did not excuse their actions. "You 5 were given a position of trust," the judge said during sentencing. "You were elected by your neighbors to manage community funds and make decisions in the best interest of everyone. Instead, you treated those funds as your personal bank account, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on luxury entertainment while the community you were supposed to serve suffered. This was not a mistake or an error in judgment. This was deliberate, sustained theft from hundreds of families over a period of 2 years. The message needs to be clear. This behavior will not be tolerated, and those who betray the trust placed in them will face serious consequences." The 5 women were led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, and I felt no satisfaction in watching it happen. It was just sad, a waste of lives over what amounted to greed and poor judgment. Back in Riverside Grove, we were slowly rebuilding. The reserve fund was growing again, thanks to the increased dues and some of the money we had recovered from the defendants' assets. We repaired the pool, fixed the roads, and hired a new landscaping company that actually did good work. The community was different now, though. People paid attention to HOA meetings. They asked questions about finances and demanded transparency. We published detailed financial reports every month and held open forums where anyone could voice concerns. I stayed on as treasurer for 2 years, then stepped down to let someone else take over. I'd done what I could to help fix things, but I was tired. The whole ordeal had taken a toll on everyone involved. Greg remained president for 4 years before retiring from the board. Under his leadership, Riverside Grove became known as one of the most well-managed HOAs in the region. We were even featured in a magazine article about HOA reform, held up as an example of how communities can recover from financial mismanagement. The 5 former board members served their sentences in various California state prisons. Deborah spent the full 4 years behind bars, while the others were released after serving about 70% of their sentences with good behavior. When they got out, none of them returned to Riverside Grove. Their homes had been sold to pay the judgment against them, and I doubt they would have been welcome anyway. I heard through the grapevine that Deborah moved to Arizona, working as a waitress and living in a small apartment. Patricia went to live with her sister in Oregon. The others scattered to various parts of California, trying to rebuild their lives away from the community they had betrayed. As for me, I continued living in the house I had shared with my wife, finally at peace with the neighborhood again. The whole experience had taught me the importance of vigilance, of paying attention to how organizations are run, and not assuming that people in positions of authority have your best interests at heart. It also taught me about the capacity for ordinary people to rationalize terrible behavior. Deborah and her friends were not career criminals or evil masterminds. They were just middle-aged women who convinced themselves they deserved special treatment, that the rules did not apply to them, that they could take what they wanted because they were doing important work. But in the end, the rules did apply. The law caught up with them, and they paid the price. On a warm evening in late summer, 5 years after the special assessment letter had arrived in my mailbox, I sat on my porch watching the sunset over Riverside Grove. The neighborhood looked beautiful, better than it had in years. The common areas were well maintained, the pool sparkled in the fading light, and children were playing in the park. Greg walked by with his dog and stopped to chat. "Hard to believe it has been 5 years," he said. "Feels like another lifetime," I replied. "We did good work, though, saved the neighborhood, held people accountable. I'm proud of what we accomplished." "Me too." He continued his walk, and I remained on my porch, thinking about everything that had happened. The anger, the fear, the uncertainty of not knowing if we would lose our homes, the satisfaction of seeing justice done, even if it came at a terrible cost. I thought about Karen showing up at my door, crying and apologizing. I wondered if she had found any peace, if she had been able to rebuild her life after prison. Part of me hoped she had. Not because I forgave her exactly, but because holding on to anger for that long was exhausting. The community had healed, stronger and more engaged than before. People knew their neighbors now. They attended meetings and asked questions. They understood that democracy, even at the HOA level, required participation and vigilance. As the last light faded from the sky, I went inside, closed the door, and poured myself a drink. Tomorrow, there would be another board meeting, another set of financial reports to review, another month of community management. But tonight, I could rest, knowing that we had faced a crisis and come out the other side. The special assessment letter was still in a drawer somewhere, a reminder of how quickly things could go wrong when people stopped paying attention. But it was also a reminder of how a community could come together, could fight back against injustice, and could rebuild something better than before. Riverside Grove was home again, finally, truly home. And that was worth everything we had been through. The following years brought a strange kind of normalcy to our community. New families moved in, unaware of the drama that had preceded their arrival, except for what they might read in online reviews or hear from longtime residents. The story of Deborah and her board became something of a legend in HOA circles, a cautionary tale told at community management conferences and used as a case study in HOA law classes. I became something of a reluctant expert on HOA governance, occasionally speaking at local events about financial oversight and board accountability. It was not something I had ever wanted to do, but I felt an obligation to share what we had learned so other communities could avoid the same mistakes. One spring afternoon, about 6 years after everything began, I received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello? William? This is Patricia Chambers." I was silent for a moment, genuinely shocked. Patricia was the last person I expected to hear from. "I know you probably do not want to talk to me," she continued quickly, "and I understand if you hang up, but I wanted to let you know something. I am working with a nonprofit now that helps educate HOA boards about their legal obligations. We use our case as an example of what not to do. I just thought you should know that some good is coming from what we did, even if it cannot undo the harm." "Patricia, I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything. I just needed you to know that I think about what we did every single day. I cannot take it back, but I'm trying to make sure it does not happen to other communities." We talked for a few more minutes. She told me about her life after prison, how difficult it had been to find work with a felony conviction, how her family had slowly started speaking to her again. She sounded genuinely remorseful, though I knew that did not erase what she had done. When we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, thinking about redemption and whether people could truly change. I did not have an answer, but I suppose the fact that she was trying counted for something. The neighborhood itself continued to thrive. We had implemented strict financial controls that would have made it nearly impossible for another board to repeat what Deborah's board had done. Every expense over $500 required approval from at least 3 board members and documentation justifying how it served the community. We hired an outside accounting firm to audit our books annually, and the results were published for all homeowners to see. The reserve fund grew steadily, reaching pre-crisis levels after about 5 years. We used it responsibly, replacing the clubhouse roof, upgrading the playground equipment, and repaving roads that had deteriorated. Every time we spent money from the reserve fund, we held a town hall to explain the expense and answer questions. The culture of the community had changed fundamentally. Homeowners were engaged in a way they had not been before. They knew their board members, attended meetings regularly, and understood the community's finances. What Deborah and her board had intended as a betrayal had ultimately made Riverside Grove stronger. I eventually met someone, a woman named Sandra, who worked as a nurse at the hospital in Sacramento. She was kind and patient, understanding about my past and not intimidated by the baggage I carried. We dated for 2 years before getting married in a small ceremony at the Riverside Grove clubhouse, surrounded by neighbors who had become like family through everything we had been through together. Sandra had not lived in the community during the crisis, which was perhaps a blessing. She had fresh eyes and did not carry the same wounds that many longtime residents still harbored. She brought a lightness to my life that I had not realized I was missing. Greg and I remained close friends, meeting for coffee every Sunday morning to talk about everything from community issues to our families to politics. He had become something of a local celebrity after the case, interviewed by news outlets and even asked to consult on other HOA disputes around California. "You know what the crazy thing is?" he said one Sunday morning. "We never wanted any of this. We just wanted to live in a nice neighborhood and be left alone. But sometimes you have to fight for what is right, even when it is uncomfortable." "You think it was worth it?" I asked. "All the stress, the lawsuits, the years of our lives consumed by this?" "Yes," he said without hesitation, "because if we had not fought, they would have gotten away with it, and other boards would have seen that and thought they could do the same thing. We set a precedent. We showed that homeowners have power if they are willing to use it." He was right, of course. The case had become important beyond just our community. Other HOAs around the state had used our legal strategy to challenge their own corrupt boards. The laws around HOA governance had been strengthened, with new requirements for financial transparency and accountability. But it had come at a cost. Several families in our community had divorced under the stress of the crisis. Some people had health issues triggered by the anxiety. A few elderly residents had been forced to sell their homes when they could not afford the legal fees, even though we tried to minimize individual costs. The 5 women who had served on the corrupt board had their lives destroyed, which was a consequence of their own actions, but was still sad to witness. Their families suffered. Their children dealt with the shame of having parents who went to prison. The ripple effects of their decisions extended far beyond what they probably ever imagined. As I approached my 60th birthday, 8 years after the crisis began, I reflected on how much my life had changed. I had lost my wife, faced the potential loss of my home, fought a years-long legal battle, and somehow come out the other side with a new marriage, stronger friendships, and a community that felt more like home than ever. The last time I thought about Deborah Winston was when I saw a news article about HOA reform legislation being passed in California. The article mentioned our case prominently, noting how the excesses of the Riverside Grove Board had prompted lawmakers to strengthen oversight requirements for HOAs across the state. I wondered if Deborah saw the article, if she understood that her legacy was not the parties and trips she had enjoyed, but rather the reforms that her actions had prompted. I wondered if she had any regrets or if she still justified what she had done in her own mind. But mostly, I did not think about her at all anymore. She had taken up enough of my time and energy. The crisis was over, the community had healed, and life had moved on. On a perfect autumn evening, I sat on my porch with Sandra, watching our neighbors walk by, walking their dogs and pushing strollers. The community pool was closing for the season, and I could hear children laughing as they took their last swims before winter. "You seem happy," Sandra said, taking my hand. "I am," I replied, and I meant it. The special assessment letter was still in a drawer somewhere, a reminder of how quickly things could fall apart. But it was also proof that communities could come together, could fight injustice, could rebuild something better than before. Riverside Grove was not just a place I lived anymore. It was a community I had helped save, a neighborhood I had fought for, a home in the truest sense of the word, and that was worth more than any amount of money that Deborah and her board could have stolen. The sun set over the Sacramento hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Tomorrow would bring another day, another board meeting, another set of financial reports to review. But tonight, I was at peace, finally, completely at peace. The crisis that began with a cream-colored envelope in my mailbox had taught me that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they stood together. It taught me that justice, while sometimes slow, was still possible. And it taught me that home was not just a place, but a community of people who cared enough to fight for what was right. As darkness fell over Riverside Grove, lights began to come on in windows up and down the street. Each light represented a family, a home, a life being lived in the community we had all worked to preserve. And in that moment, I knew that everything we had been through had been worth it. The story of Deborah Winston and her corrupt board would be told for years to come, a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of accountability. But for me, the real story was about the community that came together, refused to be victims, and built something stronger from the ashes of betrayal. That was the story worth telling. That was the story that mattered. And as I closed my door for the night, I carried that knowledge with me, a quiet pride in what we'd accomplished together.